And we'll begin recording. All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to this month's, which is November's Meet a Deaf Person. Our distinguished guest today is Cheryl Shahan. We are thrilled to have you join us today.
It's my pleasure.
I'm going to let Cheryl introduce herself. Just give a brief introduction, and then I will start the interview.
Hello. As she said, I'm Dr. Cheryl Shahan. This is my sign name. I grew up with just a C on the crook of my arm. When I moved to Knoxville, I was surprised to find out that somebody had that name. So when I moved, I had to change it to a CS. So that is my professional sign name. But personal, if you go back to Ohio, where my family and friends live, they'll do a C on the crook of the arm and not the CS. So I grew up in Ohio. I went to several different colleges. I moved around a lot in my life and I lived all over the United States. I lived in Colorado. I've lived in Utah, New Mexico, Maryland, Ohio. Where else? Well, I live here in Tennessee now. And I've really enjoyed it so far.
And what do you do here?
I work at the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville. I'm a clinical assistant professor, and I teach classes, plus I supervise and support our interns that are going to become our future deaf ed teachers. And I've been here 4 years already. Wow.
That's awesome. It's always good to see deaf people who are involved in higher education fields. We need more of that.
I completely agree. We need more good teachers in the K-12 system. I taught 5 years at the New Mexico School for the Deaf, 4 years in elementary, 1 year in high school. Then I went on to Cameroon in Central Africa, where I taught there. So it's a totally different perspective on deaf ed in America and over in Africa and another country. So it's good to have that whole experience, as far as deaf education goes.
Mm-hmm. Especially in other languages, having native sign languages, American Sign Language. So I totally agree 100%.
Yes.
So we're thrilled that you are here. And I would like for you to discuss not just your life and your background, but also help us learn a little bit more about your parents, how they felt, what they went through in making the decisions about academic placements, how they figured that out. I think a lot of parents that might be here today or watch the recording later are going to face similar things. They have a lot of choices and decisions to make, and it's not easy. It's very challenging.
I agree.
I'm hopeful that you can explain the experience you had growing up and what your parents went through. Help them this is a safe space to help people understand what they went through. So we'll start. You mentioned that you were born in Ohio.
Yes.
So how were you identified as deaf? What did it look like when you were born into your family? Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting. Let me just give you a little bit of background. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. The oldest brother is Mike. The second brother is Mark. He is deaf. The third brother is Matt, signed here. So a long time ago, his name's almost on the crook, but then it changed to an M on the nose. So all my brothers have their names right down the front of the face. Then my sister is here. She's hearing. Her name's Cindy. And then I was the baby. So I'm going to talk more about my brothers, but this one particular brother, my deaf brother, is the most important. But when I was born, they didn't really know if I was deaf, hearing, hard of hearing. They weren't sure. I was identified my first day of kindergarten. Back there, they didn't have that EDHI. And I went to public school. It was very close to my home, and I walked there. And I remember a line of students, and a girl in front of me had this long red hair. And I remember just thinking she had beautiful hair. And then I was tapped on the shoulder, and I went with one of the teachers to another area. I didn't know, but we got in a car and we drove all the way to Columbus, Ohio. and that was to an audiologist. And I remember being in the audiologist booth. I remember all these little holes in the booth. I remember they closed the door. Yeah, you remember that, right, Nero? And the next thing I knew, they were packing and they drove from Columbus to the deaf school. And I was just 4. And I was in elementary. So I didn't go to public school. I went to the school for the deaf. And my family lived in Lancaster, which is about a 45-minute drive from Columbus.
So you started going to a school for the deaf at the age of 4, at the same time realizing that you were deaf. So why did your parents feel that you would automatically go at that young age to the school for the deaf? Why didn't they wait until later?
That's a good question. My brother that I told you about, obviously, I wasn't grown yet, but I wasn't even born yet. But they thought he was mentally delayed. They thought he had some type of developmental disability. He didn't have the vocabulary, and he was in several different educational systems. Then they realized he was not mentally delayed. He was actually deaf. Unfortunately, even still today, a lot of times people think there's another intellectual disability or a developmental delay, and it's actually deafness. So the school district said that he needed to go to the Alexander Graham Bell School, which taught them to speak. That was back in the 70s, and the philosophy back then was to really focus on oralism or speech. And a school for the deaf was the last option. So my brother went to the oral school at that time. They were very strict there. They did not permit him to sign. They wanted him to speak only and use his hearing. And back then, the hearing aids had the little box on the chest with the wires that ran up to your ears. And he hated that. He always talked about that. He hated the sound that those made. But he dealt with it at the time. And when he was there, it was kind of ironically, A.G. Bell School was very close to the Ohio School for the Deaf. They were very close in proximity. So how or why, I don't know, but both of my parents have passed away, and I wish I could ask them now, but I do know they struggled and they fought hard for my brother to be placed at the school for the deaf. My mom was a baker, and she worked at various schools, and she was a very good baker. The principals and the teachers always wanted her baked goods, her cookies. They really loved her. My dad was a milkman, and so he would pick up milk from the various farms and later drop them off at the different schools in the area. So I feel like my parents probably talked with various people in the school system and found out more information about deafness and more information about the school. That's what I feel. Because both of them at that time, my mom, she didn't have a high school diploma. She had her GED. My dad did graduate from high school, but both of them fought the school district to have my brother sent to the school for the deaf. And in the 9th grade is when he was moved from A.G. Bell to the school for the deaf. And my parents immediately saw a huge improvement in his communication, his ability to express himself, his behavior, his emotions. He developed a lot of social skills. Everything improved. So when they found out I was deaf, there was no question where I would go to school. And at the age of 4, they felt the earlier the better. They felt, with my brother Mark, they waited. So they wanted me to start early.
So it's not just about starting early, but also making sure that you were exposed to language, exposed to literacy, bilingualism, which is English, written and reading English, and an ASL format at such a young age. I feel like you wait too late, it's too late.
Yes, I agree. When I was placed at the school for the deaf, back then, they believed that the children should stay at school. I can't remember if it was several weeks or several months, but we stayed there. And that was specifically for access to communication. And my parents accepted that. Later on, we came home every 2 weeks on Fridays. And I know my parents, everybody used spoken language and they signed, they SimCommed. All the children in the house were able to sign. And, my parents included me. We did things. My parents always, every Friday when I would come home, they would drive to the drugstore and we would buy comic books. That was my favorite thing to read. So I had a lot of exposure to comics, and I just read them all the time. So my parents were very supportive. So that was reading. Then some of the teachers would sign only, and some teachers I had with SimCom, but my parents always made sure they would go to different meetings, ask how I was doing in school. And they really asked a lot of good questions. They made sure I got a good education, and they emphasized education. And in high school, I'm not sure if my parents made the decision or if the school made the decision to send me to a public school for one class my first year. And then they would increase it to 2 classes, 3 classes. Most of the time it was for English. They felt that the School for the Deaf at that time, maybe their English classes were not as good as the public school. So I would go half a day in the public school, and I would have an interpreter and a note taker, and I would go half a day at the School for the Deaf for the socialization, and I would go back and forth between the two.
Having that experience, part in a school for the deaf and part in a public school, is something that I experienced as well.
Oh,
So we had the same situation. In English class, I wanted more of a challenge, so I took AP courses at the public school. Now, my school for the deaf had AP classes, but I wanted more than what they offered. So I did go to a public school for those classes. Some of the classes, like for math, I needed to have math be presented very visually in American Sign Language, which was my first language. So I would do that at the School for the Deaf, math and science.
Yeah, it's the best of both worlds, going back and forth like that.
Exactly. And so I just feel like I got all the things that I needed. I got the social time. I was able to participate in sports. I was able to interact with peers at my level. I also got I got stimulated through education in the other school. I'm sure you had experience with that too. Can you tell me more?
Yes and no. Yes, the socializing and hanging out, but no, I felt that they just threw me into the public school without really preparing me, to be honest. And it was
interesting.
using an interpreter. Growing up, I had not had that exposure to an interpreter using one. When I went to public school, I was the only deaf person, and then you add that I had a second peer who was deaf that was added. But I was not prepared. I wish they had prepared me what an interpreter did, what that looks like, what I was involved, to be a little more assertive. I felt like a deer in the headlights, really, when I went to that public school, just like, oh my goodness. So it was a challenge. It was rough for me at first. It was hard because there were big classes, but also because I was learning a lot. That my relationship with the teachers were really good, but not necessarily with my peers. I really didn't develop that confidence with making friends with the hearing people. It's like, oh, you're deaf. But now, with more support of deaf going into public school and mainstream programs, and the communication and the self-advocacy skills that they have, and knowing what to do, having that support and being prepared. Luckily, I wasn't prepared, but it was a challenge for me, but I wouldn't want to go through that again. But the education itself, no. But ironically, I did ask my parents, why did I go to, this was a school named Centennial, and I wanted to go to Lancaster High School, where my brothers and sisters all went. I wanted to go to the same school they did. And my parents said, no, you're going to go to Centennial, or you're going to stay at the School for the Deaf. As I grew up, I asked my dad, I said, why did I go to Centennial and not the other high school, and then stay at the School for the Deaf? And my parents both said at that time that the School for the Deaf had a better education than the public school that my brothers and sisters went to, that they felt like it was a better education. So that's why we wanted you to stay there so you could, improve and get better. They didn't want me to lose out on that education by transferring me to Lancaster High School when I got older.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you mentioning that you are the only one in your family that has a master's and a PhD. So
Yes,
I guess your parents made the right decision in encouraging you to really immerse yourself and have a love for school.
yes, yes, that's right. I remember after that time I got my master's, one day I met my dad and my family in the family room. And I said, Dad, I'm just curious. Why did you send me to the school for the deaf when I was 4 years old? I was so young. And my dad looked at me and said, all he said was, who in this family has a master's? And I was like, oh, and now I have my PhD. But, I that helped me, I think, really get ready for school in the future. All my brothers and sisters graduated from high school, but none of them went on to college. They could have, but they didn't. I was the only one who continued my education. So that early start of education, going to school, having that language, that social language was the key.
So I want to emphasize, you mentioned that your parents were very involved and supportive in anything that you did, whether you went to the public school or the school for the deaf, the classes that you took. Your parents were always involved. They wanted to know what was up. And I'm sure you felt like that applied. Does that apply to the parents today? Is that a different time? Or tell me, what are some tips that you would encourage parents today to how to become more involved in their children's school life?
Oh, several things, several things. First of all, whatever the child's involved in, whether it be drama, sports, show up, be there. It's important. My parents used to come to see me. You know, I was athletic, and my parents. Oh, you said it was a four. Yeah, it was
45-minute drive. That's a
yes.
lot.
They
That's an investment in
they
time.
always came. They always came. Every time I would go home on the weekends, we would all play sports together. We'd go to the park and shoot basketball, or we'd play catch out in the yard, and that helped me improve my skills. Of course, that's what they tell me. So whatever you can be involved in, be involved and show up to your parent meetings. Your parent teacher meetings. When I was older, they would come and be involved in the meetings, and my parents would, what do you want? What do you think? And I would tell them what I wanted and what I thought. Um,
That's very empowering for you to make your own decisions
yes,
when it's age appropriate, of course.
yes. And when I was younger, and stayed at school, and my friends still tease me, but my parents always sent me a care package. Um, and they'd have different things inside, different, things that my mom would make. She might make me cookies, um, those little Debbie cakes, those little cupcakes and things. She would put some of those little Debbies in there. She'd give me a letter from my sister. Sometimes she would send me my comics. A long time ago, I'm trying to find an example now, but like Love Is ... those comics, and I knew that was from my sister, and I knew which ones were from my brother. And they did that all through my school years, K through 12. Even when I went to college, even when I was getting my PhD, my mom would still send me these care packages. It was so sweet. And then later, of course, I would share things with my friends. And it was my parents', I think, way of helping me get friends or make friends. When I was at the school for the deaf, they would send boxes to my class and they'd say, make sure you share these with the other students. And of course, I would always keep out some for me, and then I would give some to my friends, to my classmates. But they always appreciated my parents. And that was one way that they could show how much they cared about me. So even though I wasn't there physically, they still communicated with me by sending me these care packages or letters, handwritten letters that they would write. Every week I would get letters and we would correspond, and they expected me to write back as well. So we would correspond back and forth. And that was one way to just bond and have that relationship. It's funny, I would read some of my mom's letters, and she would say things like, "Oh, I'm hanging out the clothes on the line. It's warm outside. It's breezy today." That type of conversation to help me feel like I was included in the family. And it would also help with my English. And if I didn't understand, I would ask the house mother, I'd say, "What does this say? What does this mean?" And she would help me understand. And so it did support my literacy skills and different things like that that were just very important that helped me feel included in a non-communication way, but also, the care packages would show up and it would just make me feel supported. We would always get together and talk, and those types of times were important too.
One common thing that I'm noticing, a theme you might say, your family always made sure that you were included. It didn't matter what they were doing, whether it was eating or playing, working, going out, staying at home, you felt safe and welcomed in that environment. That is one of the best ways to make any deaf child, well, it doesn't have to be a deaf child, it could be any child, to help them feel comfortable with who they are. I think that's so important.
Yes, I was fortunate, and my brothers and sisters always, wanted me to join in and tag along. My sister delivered newspapers a long time ago, and she had let me come along with her and help her deliver the papers and help collect the money. She'd tell me who to go see and who to get the money from. And I remember that one situation. My sister told me, "See that house over there? Those people, you don't want to go there." And I went with her, and my sister got the money, and my sister said, see you later." I could tell she said, "See you later." And I said, "I thought you said you didn't like that house. Why did you say see you later? I thought it meant you wouldn't go back." And she says, "No, that just means another time, not right now." Oh, so I learned things like that. So I just want to mention my sister signed really well. We were very close in age. And growing up, me and my brother Mark, of course, we would sign to each other. But at home, they would speak. And at school, we would sign, but my parents would speak. Um, my parents and my brothers and sisters all went to church near my home and took a sign language class. And I remember this yellow book, and it said SEE and then ASL. So they all tried learning signs, and we would sit around and sign. But Mark would get bored and he would start speaking. And I wish that, we didn't speak as much. I wish we would, my parents would gesture, and they gestured pretty well, but they probably spoke more. My oldest brother signed some. He spoke and he fingerspelled. This one spoke. This one fingerspelled. This one signed. But later growing up, I noticed that my parents, either because they saw my relationship and how I could sign, or my parents themselves, their hearing started declining, they would gesture more. And my mom said, "Oh, I wish I remember all those signs." So I encourage parents now to sign and keep learning sign, even if your child can speak some. It's important as far as bonding and building that relationship. Speaking's fine, writing's fine, but now my brothers, they write back and forth to each other, and that's, too late. They wish they had learned more earlier. And so they could find a way to, fit that in. And that's just something I encourage people to do.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned that you could speak a little bit and that they spoke and gestured. What is your view on speaking and signing? Do you feel that immersing yourself in ASL would decrease your ability to learn speech? How do you think?
Well, that's interesting because really I grew up when I was first identified as being deaf. They immediately, put hearing aids on me, just like my brother, with the box and the wires that went up to my ears, that was around my neck. They sent me to speech class. And a long time ago at that time, it wasn't a group, it was one-on-one. But then it was a group, and then later on it became one-on-one. And then some of the teachers would SimCom, which is talking and signing at the same time. But they didn't force that you have to SimCom, you have to sign. Everyone decided for themselves, and most of the teachers would sign and speak at the same time because they thought that was the best fit for all. Because some could speak, some could sign, so that was their philosophy. In the cottage, they would speak, but in school they would sign, or at home we would SimCom. So I would do all of those different types of communication, and I wasn't pressured to do one or the other. The one thing I was pressured to use was my hearing aids. And I do remember, when they changed from the box to going behind the ear, a lot of people thought I was a hearing person. If I had my hearing aid on, I would turn it off when somebody came up, and I would turn it off when they went away. So I graduated and I realized, why do I do that? So I tried to practice just turning mine off. And if somebody came up and spoke to me, and I would stop the hearing aid. And I don't like to hear a lot of sound. That's just me. I don't like that background noise. I like it quiet. So I feel like for me, I have the best of both worlds because I could sign and I could speak. But I felt like only my family could, I'm clarifying, only my family understood my speech. They were the ones, my brothers and sisters and my parents. That was it. I didn't speak with people out in public, because I was afraid. I was very shy. That was just my personality. But when I became an adult, I continued. And then I noticed, as I stopped using my hearing aid, my voice kind of, I did stop using my voice, and I was fine with that. So I use my voice in an emergency. But when I was teaching elementary at a school for the deaf in New Mexico, I would talk and I would sign. And during an IEP meeting one time, one of the moms says, "Oh, I want my daughter to be able to speak like you." And that really pressured the expectations, because, her daughter had beautiful sign language. She was very artistic. She was smart, but all she wanted was for her to be able to speak like me. And I realized at that moment, I am not going to use my voice anymore, except for emergencies. Even though, if I don't want to write back and forth, I might use my voice, but they thought speech was more important than any other language or than academics. And it just was an unrealistic expectation. And I tried to explain. I explained to all, all parents want their child to learn to use their voice and speak, but they have other communication strategies too. I do wish my parents had encouraged me to use writing back and forth if I didn't feel comfortable speaking. But I never felt like I was forced to speak or not speak. Well, it's a little bit of a lie. My mom wanted me to use my hearing aid, and she would yell for me, to set the table. She would go, "Cheryl, set the table." And I would hear that and I would go running in. So I think she did expect that some. But, when I knew she was getting ready to call me, I would turn my hearing aid on. And when it was done, I would turn it back off.
So I would say the point of that story is that you never felt that you should never pressure your child to fit with just one communication method, that you should wait to see what your child's preference is and let your child lead you to what he or she wants, and make sure that it's age appropriate, that they can communicate what they want.
Yes, that, and also make sure that the child has different communication strategies for different people, with their peers, with adults who can hear, with adults who are deaf, with adults who sign, with adults who speak. I was lucky. I was exposed to all those, and I could adjust to fit whatever I needed to. Just make sure they have that skill to be able to use different communications strategies, like peers on the playground or in the cottage. and the people I hung out with, that I could communicate with them.
I agree. I think it's best to expose the child to as many resources as they can and build those tools. Help that child build a toolbox so that whatever situation happens, they can figure out which tool will best match that situation. This situation is where I would best use speech. In this other situation, maybe I should to write back and forth instead of try and talk, and then know which situation is best to just conduct in sign language. I agree.
Yes. Yes, what you mentioned made me think of something else that happened when I was 16 and my parents were driving from Columbus. Um, when we got out of Columbus, yeah, it was right. My dad got out and then he was letting me drive. So we were switching around in the seats of the car. My dad sat and beside me, and my mom was in the back. And then the police came up behind me. And mom told dad, I remember looking in the rearview mirror. He said, you'll need to help Cheryl. I said, no, Cheryl can speak for herself. I'm like, you help me, Dad. He says, no, you do it. You've got paper or you can speak. So the policeman came. I rolled down the window. I explained, that I was trying. I was just gesturing, and the police was like, oh, okay, fine. That's no problem. No problem. And my mom was like, oh, you did it. You did that yourself. I'm so proud of you. And then I realized I could communicate. I didn't realize it was such a big deal with being a policeman. And then later on, I increased my confidence increased. I would go to McDonald's, or I would ride, or I would go in and speak. My dad would say, "Oh, you go in, you do it." Well, they can understand me, or if they didn't understand me, then I could write. So I was able to adjust my communication, and my parents gave me those opportunities. When we would go to a restaurant, or if we were looking for something at the store, they'd say, well, you ask the clerk, or you write back and forth to communicate. So when New Mexico, I taught a class about going to the store, and we discussed how would we communicate with hearing people that don't know sign language. Some prefer to speak, and some students say, no, I prefer to write. And some would say, well, I don't know. I just see what happens when I go. But each one had a clear communication plan. So when we went into the store, they felt comfortable either speaking or writing or gesturing. And that was based on my experience. Nobody taught me that in high school, but I wanted to give them that opportunity to teach them. And, maybe some parents, maybe you need to have a plan. Maybe if this doesn't work, you communicate this way. If this doesn't work, but support your child with those communication tools.
That is the best way to empower a child. You may not realize that the child needs help until they're in it. So
Yes.
that allows the child to make their journey experiencing on them. They make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the challenge of learning. That's how we grow.
Absolutely. And parents gave me that, they provided that support if I needed it. They would see if I looked at them, they would know to help them. But if I didn't, then they wouldn't. But if I looked their way, they would give me that encouragement and I would continue. So it depended, but they were very, very supportive.
Yeah. That is a beautiful way to wrap up for today. I would now like to transition to our question and answer session. So for the parents who are watching, and as well as the professionals, you have the option. You can type your question into the chat box. You can start your video and speak, or you can start your video and sign. But we would like you to start your screen in all three of those options. We would like to see who you are. That's part of deaf culture, is to have good eye contact, have face-to-face interactions, because without that, we feel lost. So I'm happy to see so many of us here. So does anybody, if you have a question, please raise your hand so that we know who to look at.
And I'm not shy. You can ask me any question, anything.
And if you'll give me a moment, I'd like to pin Cheryl's screen first. Okay. So if you have a question, go ahead and either type it into chat, and then go ahead and type that you want to ask a question so I can pin you first.
Oh, are you gonna? Okay, they're gonna type it
Just
first.
chat that you have a question, and
Got
then
it.
I'll pin you and you can ask your question. I'm going to give you a few minutes. I know that Sharon has a question.
Hey, Sharon.
Hi, can everybody see me okay? That was such a great discussion. I grew up in an orals program. And I'm curious about your experience because it's a little different than mine. My experience was that sitting around the family at the dinner table, they would all speak and I missed out on a lot. At that time, my family didn't learn sign and I didn't either. So expressive. How did your family talk at the dinner table or at breakfast? How did you handle conversations? How did the family communicate during those family times between all of your siblings and your parents?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking that, Sharon. When I was growing up, I was at the school for the deaf during the week, and then on the weekend, my parents, my brothers and sisters would sit around the table and eat. So they would gesture, play with food, kind of, but we would play. There wasn't a lot of conversation going on, but my parents were involved. There was a lot of talking, and sometimes they would ask how your day was, but they wouldn't sign much. As I got older and saw that as an adult, I would ask, and I would chat with each other. We would chat with each other. My brothers, they didn't want to look, they would just eat and leave the table. They didn't really want to have conversations with the family, but sometimes I would interrupt one of my brothers and, say, hey, is all you're going to do is eat? But I got used to being left out, he got used to being left out of conversations, but I didn't like that. So I liked having that eye contact during mealtime. I liked having that conversation during mealtime, but I had to work at it. Sometimes they would sign some, and they would, ask one to interpret for the other, but that's really not the best conversation, But a lot of our communication happened through play, through games, through cards, TV game shows. But sitting around the table at mealtime, not a lot of conversation happened. It was a struggle.
Mm-hmm. That is often called dinner table syndrome. And that is something that many deaf people that have hearing families experience. They feel very left out at dinner time or during family gatherings because they can't communicate with everyone. So they might ask, what did she just say? And they'll say, hold on, or I'll tell you later. And then they often never do tell them. They either forget or just don't take the time.
Or they say one word. They've talked and laughed and talked and laughed. Oh, we're talking about a car. And then they go on with their story and you get car. That's all you know. That kind of thing.
So that is something that we all want to prevent, so that if you are now aware of it, you can work to make sure that your child feels included at all times, and not just at the dinner table, but just in general everyday life. So thank you for that question, Sharon. That was great. Next we have Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Cheryl. Okay, you're on, Tracy.
Thank you. Cheryl, I want to ask you.
Oh, hold on. Let me pin the interpreter instead. Go ahead.
Cheryl, I would like to ask you about your experiences as a professional in the quote unquote school systems. It seems to me I remember talking with you about this, so I may not remember everything accurately, but you were very involved with camps with children and some immersion type of experiences where the children came together and the parents were involved, and there was a real community. And I don't know if it was a true parent-child immersion, but what do you think about that? And how would you advise parents to decide to participate, whether it's listening spoken language or sign or cued speech, or what would your recommendations be?
Yes, I highly recommend. I'm biased because I was a PE major, a rec major. That's what my bachelor's degree is. And the reason being, I encourage play, and that helps hearing and deaf people come together, whether it be adults or children, if they come together through play. So camps, yes, is an immersion experience for deaf children and adults. And it's a nice activity. It's a nice way to see each other laugh, to play, just to talk. Either a camp or even like a family learning weekend, where we did that for vacation. That was the best thing, that the parents and other parents, to see what they do with their children, they can look and say, oh, you do this, oh, these parents do this. So it's a good way to see what other parents do. I went to Gallaudet my freshman year, and I was exposed to, my parents were exposed to that too when we went. I didn't know who had more fun, me or my parents, when we both went to Gallaudet. My parents had a blast at Gallaudet. They looked around, they saw so many intelligent deaf adults. They were just blown away, and they were so immersed. They didn't want to leave, ironically, but it was an opportunity for them. My parents could, they knew at that time, my parents they were involved, and they knew the importance of being involved. And so it's important to identify what families like, if they're, when they're in drama, oh, hey, hey, sweetie. But to get involved with, hey, are you sleepy? Are you sleepy, girl? So if they're involved in sports, then maybe they can be involved in sports, but something. I remember at Vista, I volunteered. We did home visits when I worked for Vista as a volunteer. And we would go to, like baseball games, and they'd say, oh, your daughter's deaf. How does she play sports? How does she play that? Oh, yeah. We go to the rec center, and they provide an interpreter, and, they all played together. And so they found out, that I was really good at softball. So, my family played baseball together. But it's important that families find something that they can do together, and that becomes a communication tool.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that answer. I think that was a great question. Thank you. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask a question? Just drop me a quick chat. And you can ask about anything.
Oh,
You
I
can
think
ask
Amy.
about Cheryl herself. Oh, Amy. Yes. Hold on just a minute, Amy. Let me pin you.
Hey,
Okay.
Amy.
Do you want to sign, or do you want to speak your question? It's up to you. I'm going to try and sign it. Yay. Okay, so my child just turned 3. And yay, going to deaf school. So I'm curious, how can I support my child's education? I'd say her language is developing. How do you sign that? Develop. So developing English and ASL both at home. So how can I do that?
Now, my mom, her favorite way of supporting me was through cooking. I helped her cook. My family wasn't really allowed in the kitchen. We left mom alone when she was cooking, but she let me go in there and look at the cookbooks. I had to get the measuring cups. I had to find different, I would say, what's that? We would use recipes. So that was my family's way to help support me and my literacy. Or sometime the grocery list, we'd be out of oranges. She'd say, okay, put down oranges on the grocery list. And that was at 3. I was already able to write some. Can she write? Can your daughter write at age 3? Can she write any? Okay, not yet. So she's not old enough for that, but maybe
OAS.
That's fine, but maybe have her write, ORA, so you know what that means, oranges. And then, when you go to the store, say, okay, where is this? And make sure she makes that connection of when you need something from the store, when you go get it at the store. You can use your favorite book. For me growing up, it was comic books. It was comics. I love the comics. So we would talk about comics, and we would, um, use those bubbles where they're talking, whatever she likes, just go with that. And it's a way for you both, whether it's reading, then you circle it back around to signing and you go back and forth. What's your daughter's favorite color?
Purple.
Okay, purple. So maybe find things that are purple around, like Barney. Barney the dinosaur. I don't know if you have that. Does that scare her? Maybe. But, just make that correlation with purple. Maybe a story about something purple, like purple pig or a purple cow, and you can create stories even about the color purple to help and build on that.
And one suggestion that I found helpful, my parents did this with my family. My mom would always label things in the house. She labeled everything. She put a sign on the oven, the fridge, the chair, the table, cups, spoons. Well, some utensils, not every utensil, but most everything had a label. And not just the English word, but also she would show the signs for fingerspell. She would print out the fingerspell, like for chairs, she would print out the hand shapes for CHAINR. So she would put both the English word and the ASL fingerspell on each label. And so when I was wandering around the house a little bored, I was constantly being exposed to chair, and I would sit there and just practice fingerspelling. And then I would see the English word next to it, so I would know that those two words meant the same thing. That helped my English skills, my literacy skills in both languages. So I would highly encourage you to try that and see if that's something she would enjoy.
Yes, and add signing to that, the word, spell it, and then sign it, chair this way. So she sees all of those different modalities. Can show videotapes with signs and captions. There's a lot of children's videos that are just fascinating. And, don't wait till they're later, start when they're young. And so they can go back and forth by watching the sign or reading the captions, and then writing as well.
Mm-hmm. One mom was asking, where do we find a printout of the ASL letters so that we can use those to label?
Carrie.
So I think you can find those online. I would Google ABC in ASL. You probably will download something, and then you can, they'll probably come out on a graph. And then you could download and copy and paste the C, the A, the T for cat, and paste those together. You probably don't want to label the cat, though. It'll make the cat mad.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think you understand my point.
I don't know what it's called, but is it the font that you type? Is that what it's called, the font? But one of the fonts is fingerspelling. Sometimes it shows up and sometimes it doesn't. I forget. I don't know if it's a Gallaudet font, but you can check the fonts, but sometimes they have that.
Yeah, maybe something you have to download.
Oh, you can download it and then you'd have it ready. It'd be easy. That'd be nice.
So thank you for that. Yes. Tracy wanted us to mention that you can contact us as well for that type of information. The 0 to 5 outreach or the deaf mentorship, either one. You can ask for information on how to make labels, where to find that. Contact us anytime. Great. Does anybody else have anything else? Any last question? We have about 5 minutes left. I see one. Is there anybody else? All right, so go ahead, Sharon. So Cheryl, I'm wondering, what do you think is your best memory that you have of your family when you were young? What do you think is your best memory together?
Right now, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but maybe swinging on the porch, just off the top of my head, swinging on the porch. That's still one of my favorite things. My brothers and sisters would be playing in the front yard or playing. My parents would swing on the front porch, or sometimes me and my mom would sit and swing and talk, and we would watch and just have conversations. I think that's my favorite memory, is just on the porch with my mom and my parents on the porch. Have a lot regarding playing and just that type of thing. But it's important.
Go ahead.
It's important for all parents to know just to do your best and spend time with your children, whether it be quiet time or time when you're doing activities, but just that quality time. That's so important. Like me, I remember, oh, Alex Trebek, who just passed away. Yeah, Alex Trebek. I grew up with my family. We always watched two shows. One was Jeopardy and the other was Wheel of Fortune. And we'd say, oh, did you know that? I didn't know that. Oh, I got that right. I won. I did that. So those two shows we loved. And my brothers and sisters and my parents, we would always watch to see who would answer first. So just little things like that are so important with your children.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I love that answer. I love that my family loved Jeopardy as well. So Tracy asked for some clarifications. So go ahead, Tracy. You're muted, Tracy.
Cheryl, you've mentioned a couple of times that your parents used spoken language. They spoke a lot to you. They gestured, but they spoke mostly. So you were at home speaking back and forth with your mom in the kitchen cooking or watching the TV shows. What were some really good ways how did your mom or dad or siblings, how did they make sure that you heard or watched or understood what was said while you were developing that ability to have a dialogue while communicating using spoken language and your hearing?
I think developing a way of turn taking, simple things like mom would say, oh, go get the butter. And she would say that. And what would I bring back? She would make sure I brought back the butter, not something else. So something that you can see the result. If we need flour, go to the pantry. And my mother would say, go to the pantry and get the flour. So I would go to the pantry, and she knew if I got it right, she would, and then she would act things out. But she often would look directly at me. But if she looked away, I couldn't understand it. She knew she had to look directly at me when she spoke to me. But something like that, so she knew that I understood. My dad was a woodworker. He worked with wood, and he would say, get some nails. And he would get 3 nails. And so he knew I understood if I brought back 3 nails. So that back and forth. And sometimes I'd say, Mom, what is that? Like EGG, egg. Oh, and I'd make that connection. It's important to have those visuals so kids make connections to things and language. I think that's probably makes the most sense, and you can apply that when you can see things, you hear or you see it, and then you make that connection. I need a purple marker, and then I would go get a purple marker. So you can see that the child understands and makes the connection.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that question. Perfect. Oh, and we did have somebody that wants to make a comment. So Jackie, go ahead.
If I sign, we'd be here all night into the morning. I'll talking's faster for me, but my heart is in signing. Cheryl, one thing that I have heard you say, you know, I work with children birth to 3. My background is audiology, but I'm a service coordinator with TEIS. And what you're saying is what we are trying to do in our program more than ever, as well as what I have done with my daughter, who is a 21-year-old girl who knows it all and has an extra 21st chromosome. So she has Down syndrome. And I have learned both as a parent and working with parents that the most meaningful way to teach your child is through meaningful things. Sitting down with flashcards or speech drills or worksheets, exercises are okay, but that meaningful interaction strengthens your bond, makes it meaningful in the real world, as well as a meaningful experience. So as a parent, I am in awe of your parents and their wisdom and their trusting their gut and the things that they did with you when, I mean, it is amazing. So hats off to them. I just wanted to say, as a parent and a professional, the things you have said would be invaluable to anyone on my caseload. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the key word, meaningful. Yes, that's critical. Not just notes, but just to apply what they've learned to realize what communication is and what that process is. So thank you. Good point. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. All right. So if there are no other questions or comments, I think we'll wrap up. Feel free to say hi or goodbye to Cheryl before you go. I don't have anybody pinned so that we can all see each other.
Hey. You parents, you're doing an awesome job. Just enjoy this work. I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe it's an opportunity, but just take that opportunity to just be with your children. I see some of your kids. It's cool to see them. That's so cool.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you, everyone who showed up. And again, this is recorded. So if you would like to see this presentation again, or you would like to share it with with other family members who could not join us tonight, or for any other reason, please just let me know. Contact me and I will share the link with you. Okay? All right, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good night. Have a good night, everybody.